The Louisville Football 2025 schedule is out, and the Cardinals have picked up their quarterback of the 2026 class. We'll discuss on today's episode of the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Now, look, I know we haven't talked football in a while, but since we're breaking that hiatus, might as well break another hiatus. Keith Arutoff back on the show, one of the hosts of From the Pink Seats podcast, one of the best talents on the State of Louisville network. Keith, what's going on, man? Welcome in.
Oh, just trying to keep tabs on the transfer portal. We're already landing kids from the 26 high school class, staying busy with football, but, enjoying things over at the Yum Center. I'm glad to see Shooty Hoops is on the up.
Are we back? Do I dare say we're back?
To quote John Wick, yeah, I'm thinking we're back.
Well, I know football is a long ways away, but we already have the blueprint. The 2025 schedule is fully out for the Louisville Cardinals. I would say we're going to give our first reaction, but it's been a couple of days, so we'll break it down a little bit. The Cardinals do have seemingly their quarterback of the 2026 class, three-star Briggs Cherry, has announced his pledge to Jeff Brohm's program. And then we'll identify the top areas of need in the spring transfer portal. So very quickly, we're just going to go give a rundown on the schedule. Louisville opens up EKU and James Madison at home. They'll have a bye week, Bowling Green at home. They'll go at Pittsburgh, Virginia at home, another bye week at Miami, Boston College, at Virginia Tech, Cal, Clemson at home, at SMU, and then rounding out the season with Kentucky at home. Keith, when you look at this, based upon how the schedule, well, here goes I have to put my flag back up as it just dropped. While I'm doing that, sort of give me a little bit of your thoughts on how this schedule relates and compares to the 2024 schedule.
Yeah, so there are a couple of similarities. We start out with a couple of tune-up games, for lack of a better word. We're paying EKU to come over here and play. And then, of course, what would be a game against Indiana, a team coming off a college football playoff berth. Unfortunately, we don't get to have that anymore. So we had to schedule James Madison because no power opponents are ever really available 1 year in advance. And then, of course, Bowling Green State, which, I'm glad we're getting them this year and not last year. I'm glad we're getting them this year and not last year. Harold Fannin was a problem. And then we roll into conference play and then cap the year off with those bad guys down the road. Pretty similar lot to last year. Like last year also, we got the 2 early bye weeks again, followed by a bit of a gauntlet to finish the year. So
don't get me wrong, not to butt in, but we don't really know exactly how good these teams are going to be. So you can only do so much projecting. But one thing that I find pretty interesting, we'll start to break it down, Keith, what had been sort of a trend with Louisville that was sort of a love and hate. You love that you got to pick up a signature win early on, but you hated that you have to face a tough test right out of the gate. Louisville, since like 2014, or actually more like 2015. Well, 2014 is when you opened up against Miami, but the Cardinals started out seasons with a tough test. I mean, Miami, and then 2015 was Auburn, 2017 was Purdue, 2018 Alabama, 19 Notre Dame. Like, you understand the trend. Last year, you opened up with Austin Peay, and then this season, I mean, theoretically, unless you just drop the ball, you're not going to face a true, really tough test until the end of September when you take on your first ACC game at Pittsburgh. So I understand that people might look at this as somewhat boring because it's blowouts. I don't care. You give a brand new roster some time to gel where they don't have to come out right out of the gate looking really good.
And I think it's a especially friendly schedule for a team with a first-year quarterback in their program. The inner coach speak in me, like, retches at the thought of me saying it, but I said it about last year's, I'll say it about this year. It's almost like you have an extra built-in month of training camp because you're playing bye games until your conference schedule. That gives extra time to get Miller Moss in the program up to speed and working well with his teammates on the offense. So it can't possibly hurt.
It's also a very 2023-esque schedule. You have 4 road games, 2 of those NFL stadiums, sort of like the 2023 campaign. And look, I've been to college games. I've seen Louisville play at Miami, Pittsburgh. It's not the greatest home field atmosphere, even when Miami was a really good team. I mean, the home atmosphere kind of lacked a little bit. And then you have at SMU and at Virginia Tech. That game against Virginia Tech, since Louisville doesn't really play them often, I kind of do worry about playing in Blacksburg, Inner Sandman. It feels like that crowd's usually pretty involved.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that this is our first time playing at Virginia Tech since we've been an ACC team.
Which is wild.
Wild. We played at Stanford before we played at Virginia Tech. But like the Virginia Tech game is sort of one where like the program deserves better than what they've gotten the last few years. Like there's always sort of that air and that mystique to the Virginia Tech team, but this ain't your daddy's Virginia Tech Hokies. They aren't that powerhouse that they used to be. Now, of course, anything can happen. They've had a ton of roster turnover. They've lost a lot of their better players in the transfer portal, but it's in that sort of like 5-6 game stretch to where at the end of the season. So anything could happen, but there were a couple other pitfalls that I think are more worrying to me on the schedule.
I look at this, and one thing that has been a talking point with this schedule, and I think that it's pretty true, is that seemingly the top 2 games on the schedule are the 2 teams that will be the best teams that Louisville may play. Clemson and Miami, road game down in Coral Gables, home game against Clemson. Both of those contests are Friday night contests, and I got to be honest, Keith, I'm not really a huge fan of that.
Really? So I'm sort of on the other side of the fence of that. So I would love to like hear where you're coming from on that. So like personally, we're coming off a bye week before the Miami game. Miami is too, and their schedule is so weird. So I've already gotten deep in the weeds looking at who we're playing and what their schedules are. Miami's 5-game stretch that ends with playing us. They play Florida, bye week. Then they play Florida State, another bye week, and then they play us. So they're just getting no rhythm at all coming into a game. And of course, down in Miami, a Friday night game, like you talk about not really having a home field atmosphere, it's going to be a ghost town.
I think it's more so about the Clemson game. The Miami game, I really don't care too much. But Clemson, I guess it's because, and I love Louisville fans, but you know that when it comes to going to games, there's any type of distraction or excuse that can be made will be made. And people are like, well, how do we get this program to where we want to be? Show up. Like, I get it. Like, things happen and it prevents you from going. But, man, I hear a lot of excuses every fall about, well, I've got night school on Friday night. I can't go, or you name it. There's always some type of an objection to where I feel like there's less objections on a Saturday.
So I get that, but I would argue that you normally get those a lot more with the August and September games. This is a Friday night game against a marquee opponent on November 14th. So even like high school football, most teams are already eliminated from the playoffs at that point in time. So if there's one thing Louisville has done well over the years, going back to the CUSA days, going back to the American or the Big East days, it's weeknight marquee matchups. I believe the West Virginia blackout game, that was a Thursday night game. Like, the city can do weeknight games and we do them great. Like, the crowd, for as much as we gripe about it, yeah, if it's a weeknight game against a Murray State, people probably aren't going to show up. A weeknight game
Miami
against
might be
Clemson?
different.
Yeah, a weeknight game against Clemson, though, the crowd's going to show up for it. I have the utmost confidence as long as the team's doing what they're supposed to do. Like, and that could be a marquee matchup. The national eye, there's no other Friday night games that are going to be on. Like, it's going to be us.
Also, let me introduce this is that you could argue, and I'm not saying this is always going to be the case. I mean, that game is against Clemson on November 14th. There's usually some pretty good SEC games, but you eliminate the opportunity for college game day. That's just a small small thing to discuss. I don't know what it is, Keith. It's just kind of like a personal thing for me. It's like, man, I kind of wish these games would be on a Saturday just because I think it's because of the crowd and knowing how this fan base sort of just reacts to sometimes nights of the week.
I would also argue, while yes, there are concerns with the fan base, playing a game on a Friday gives us the best chance to win possible. Clemson, at least going into the season on paper, is going to be the most talented team in the league. They're returning the most. Dabo's using the portal, and he's bringing in some studs on that roster. So if you're playing a Friday night game, anything to throw a team like that off their rhythm, and they're going to be coming off a short week because they play Florida State the week before, one of the few teams in our league that can match up, at least recruiting wise, star for star with them. So anything to give us a chance to win the game, and it gives us an extra day of rest going into SMU, which could be a ACC championship game deciding matchup.
That's very true. And one thing to look at is it won't really matter for the October 17th game against Miami, considering that you have the bye week before that. So it's not a short week. The last thing we'll talk about on the schedule very briefly, Keith, Clemson at SMU, Kentucky at home, that 3-game stretch at the end of the year, I feel like is 100% going to define the way that this season goes, because that can be a very challenging end to the season.
So Clemson, SMU, yes.
And then the other one, who knows, because it doesn't seem like it's going to be great, but it is still a rivalry game, and we have to treat it as such.
Exactly. Rivalry games are weird. Crazy things happen. But if we're like full transparency, as someone who was on the train of I'm not picking us to win until we do it, and then seeing what happened last year,
yes.
I'm more concerned about teams like Pitt and Virginia than I am the team down the road who, at least with the skill positions, they are in disarray right now. Stoops has done a great job slapping some Band-Aids on the trenches there, but their skill positions are currently lacking. But this is a Louisville podcast.
There's still the questions over the quarterback, but we're not going to get into that. Speaking of quarterback, 2026 class, Louisville is starting to turn their attention to that side of recruiting now that there's a lull in the transfer portal, and the Cardinals get their quarterback of the class early on, which is a trend that we've seen with Jeff Brohm. Briggs Cherry is Louisville's 2026 class quarterback. We'll discuss what to expect from the Chattanooga native when we come back on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Attending the Super Bowl is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans is unmatched. The thrill of seeing your favorite team clinch a Super Bowl berth, it's a memory that people will never forget. Well, maybe if you're a Chiefs fan, you'll never forget it. But outside of that, no one really ever makes the Super Bowl outside of the Chiefs and then whoever represents the NFC. But this year, Game Time makes it easier to create those unforgettable moments, not just with the Super Bowl, but with all sports with their new feature, Game Time Picks, making it easier to see the best deals on great seats. I've been using Game Time Picks all season to grab tickets to all of the Louisville men's basketball home games, and you can do so now going to GameTime.com. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Into the second segment of this Thursday edition with Keith Arutoff from the State of Louisville Network, from the Pink Seats podcast. Probably my favorite person. I won't go that far because I'll get some pretty nasty texts when I say that, saying, "Hey, how could you do this to me, man?" But I love having Keith on to talk football recruiting. Does a great job of breaking down the film. Keith, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about Briggs Cherry. For those who don't know who Briggs Cherry is, he is a 3-star quarterback from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Plays at Baylor School, ranked currently, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, as the 711th best prospect in the country, 66th best quarterback. We'll start out, Keith. Brohm seemingly makes it a point of emphasis to go get his quarterback early on, so you have that in the fold, but also a guy who can recruit for you, and Louisville goes out into the 2026 class and does the same thing.
Yeah, and like we saw with Mason Mims, who was a very early commitment for the Brohm staff, they go out and get Briggs Cherry, who, if you ask me to describe him, I'm going to say he's pretty much a prototypical Jeff Brohm quarterback, like tall, 6'4", 2.25, not exactly the most mobile guy in the pocket, throws with tremendous touch. And he's made a phenomenal leap in his game from his sophomore to his junior year. So if you're a film junkie like me, you're got Huddle quick saved in your favorites tab on your browser. You swing over, you watch, and you turn on his highlight reel. And the first things that hit you in the face are just phenomenal touch. He throws a very pretty deep ball, great pocket presence and good poise when pressure's in his face, of not letting his fundamentals break down, staying in and making throws. And then you look at some of the improvables. I'm not even going to say necessarily cons. The throwing motion is it's not long, but it's not fast, if that makes sense.
Throws, you see it. It's like there's the almost like the hitch where he loads it up. You know what I'm saying?
It's not quite the Tim Tebow or Byron Leftwich trebuchet throwing motion, but it's not Dan Marino snapping the ball out either. It's sort of, and it's a coachable thing. So, like, not to say this is something that's going to last forever, but that's one of the first things you notice. And then the arm strength, it's good, not great. Like, he can make the throws downfield, but he's not going to be Anthony Richardson rocket a ball 15 yards downfield between two defenders who have an opportunity to make a play on it. But I don't think we're ever going to ask a kid to be that.
He also doesn't have a ton of mobility. No. True pocket passer. Can he maybe extend the play with his legs? I mean, sure, anybody can if they have the space. The two things, and when you kind of combine them together, it shows why, Tom Loy said what he said about Briggs Cherry. The junior film is definitely a substantial leap. I like, number one, when the pressure comes, it doesn't really phase him because, number one, he's really decisive and he makes those reads extremely quickly. It kind of gives me like some similarities to Mason Mims. Is you see those, maybe not elite arm talent, but the reads and the throws are just, and he's making good intermediate throws. I would like to see him, throw guys open more during his senior season. Apparently he's doing well in camp season so far. He went to, I think it was called the Battle Miami or whatever.
Yeah.
Really good. But Tom Loy, who is really good when it comes to scouting and, analyzing football, he had a lot of good things to say about Cherry as the season's gone on.
Yeah, and I mean, he didn't get to head of scouting at 247 for nothing. So it's always good when you can land a kid like that who catches the attention of recruiting directors, but also of other recruits as well. You take a look at his commitment announcement and you see other top tier recruits like Caden Jones, top running back out of Oklahoma, who was a big fan of the commitment at Louisville. And we're in his top 5, I believe. And then also, I don't know if it's Jaden Brodno or Brodnax. I'm not sure on the last name.
I don't know that. Yeah, I'm not sure the pronunciation on that.
But 4-star defensive back that we are in the top 10 for, I believe. I don't know if he's cut it down yet or not, but recruits like that paying notice to a quarterback like this committing to Louisville. So never a bad thing.
kind of like Mason Mims, I feel like, and Deuce Adams as well. I feel like this is a guy who might not necessarily have the clout yet, but with a good junior season, with a good camp cycle in the summer, I think he could rise up to potentially compete for a top 500 spot. He's right there, just outside of the top 700. This past season, he led Baylor school to 12-1 record, the finals of the state championship, 69% pass completion, 2,700 yards, 31 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. Keith, you look at this offer sheet and not a ton of Power 5 offers, but you look at the offers he's gotten, Georgia Tech, Ole Miss, Pittsburgh, and Syracuse. I mean, you could certainly do worse with quarterbacks that know how or coaching staffs that know how to scout the quarterback position. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Syracuse, what did they do? Just have the best passer in the country on their team last year, arguably.
That's kind of mid. I mean, Lane Kiffin doesn't know how to recruit quarterbacks either, though. And honestly, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Brent Key, man, at Georgia Tech. I think he's just completely changing the narrative there. So I really am a fan of this commitment. I know people star chase a lot, and there's something to be said about investing more in high school recruiting, but the quarterback spot's just not a place, is not a place in recruiting that I'm going to worry about with this staff whatsoever. And it was a spot that they nailed in the transfer portal. They got their quarterback commit that they wanted with Miller Moss. They addressed some of the needs that they had as well, but there are still some spots that need attention, Keith. So when we come back, we're going to identify the top areas of need in the spring transfer portal window, all coming up on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Cardinal fans, want to take the time again to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day, but continuing on along with Keith Arutoff of the state of Louisville and from the Pink Seats podcast, looking at Louisville's transfer portal class, obviously headlined by a guy like Miller Moss, but looking at this class as a whole, there's going to be players on the team that will enter the portal in spring ball. It's to be expected with every school almost. And you're going to bring some more guys in. Are we on the same page about what the top need is in the portal?
I would assume that we are. I've seen a couple of think pieces throwing other positions out there. Like I saw some pieces talking about like tight end or things like that, but it's defensive back, whether you want to go corner or safety, either or. At least that's where I'm at. I feel like that's where we're shallowest. So even if you're just getting more depth, like we need bodies.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the secondary, and you mentioned something before the recording, and I definitely resonate with that. I like that there is an intention to increase depth, so you're not having to potentially replace everyone each and every year. And Louisville's done a really good job at recruiting their own roster. But I feel like Louisville needs the go-to guy at cornerback. I feel like you just need a true difference maker at safety. I'll admit I feel a little bit better about safety than I do cornerback, but I think that both could use some help. But I think you need a CB1 if you can get one in the spring portal, which there's really no guarantee that you can.
Yeah, in this day and age, and especially now with having to allocate a certain amount of money for your players that colleges are going to have to do, you're making it a more complicated market, but teams are doing a lot better job recruiting their own rosters. So we haven't been able to go out there and fill up our portal class with 30, 35, nearly 40 guys like we had previously.
Yeah, this is a smaller class. 21 guys in this class. Michael Flores, the most recent commitment, interior offensive lineman from Old Dominion. When you look past the secondary, because you mentioned that there are some think pieces out there that suggest the contrary, if you just completely put the secondary off to the side and you said, you know what, you can't use that, what would then be your answer? What's that Michael Scott quote? You watch The Office? Are you an Office guy?
Not an Office guy, but I am aware of it. Like I'll catch the episodes. I get a lot of the memes. I've seen them, like dropping the chili.
The reason I say that, and there's a short backstory, Michael Scott leaves Dunder Mifflin to start his own paper company, and they're looking to bring him back in. And he's like, the guy goes, we're planning to make an offer. He's like, we're planning to reject that offer. What is your second offer? It's like, we're planning to reject your first opinion. What is your second opinion? What would be the second position that you would choose?
It's weird because I feel really good about the state of the roster, except for the secondary at this point. I see the argument for people saying we need a tight end because we lost to Mark Redmond and we lost to Jamari Johnson. But from the pink seats earlier, I had talked about how when you have to manage a roster in almost a professional style manner, like we don't really get the bang for our buck going after star tight ends. So if I had to pick, I'd probably say another wide receiver, maybe not a wide receiver 1 because you do have Bell and Lacey, but a number 3 to take some pressure off of TJ McWilliams, like so he doesn't have to come in and be a star immediately. To give a little bit of time to some of the youth on the roster who's developing, so we don't necessarily have to count on them out of the gate. But I really like where the roster's at right now, with the exception of the secondary. Like, I just think we need some more there.
I was going to go with, honestly, in the offseason, I was kind of worried a little bit about linebacker, but TJ Quinn making the announcement to come back, I think takes away some of those worries. You got some other guys that you brought in at the outside linebacker spots, like Darius Thomas being one of those guys, and some other players. I would go wide receiver 3 as well. It seems like we talked all offseason about, well, could it be this guy? Could you bring in Zachariah Branch? And I was like, it feels like in Madden, it would look really good. But when you factor in that there are only so many targets to go around, you brought back Chris Bell, which was a huge win. You brought back Colin Lacey, which was a huge win. But you also, I feel like if you can get a third option that can consistently be a threat, I know that wide receiver 3 hasn't been as involved the past couple of years. That has really been Amari Huggins-Bruce the past 2 years. I was hoping Kataris Hicks would stick around and get that opportunity, but didn't really get much run in the Sun Bowl. I know people want to see JoJo Stone. I know people want to see some other guys. I'm just not necessarily so sure that they're ready at the moment.
I mean, if I had to, like, maximum confidence, if you had to go with a guy on the roster currently, Chris Hughes, the walk-on.
That's literally where I was going to go with this.
Yeah, Hughes, and then Antonio Meeks looks like he put together a decent performance in the Sun Bowl. I'd like to see more from him. We'll see how he progresses this offseason, and I guess an indication on how he's looking in the spring ball will be when the spring portal window comes.
Louisville brought in 2 receivers via the portal. You mentioned one of them, TJ McWilliams. They also brought in Bobby Golden from Akron, who is one of those possession receivers, not a huge yards after catch machine, but really good possession guy. I do kind of wonder about McWilliams. Didn't really get much of a run at Minnesota, but was a player that Brohm really prioritized in high school, was committed to Purdue when Brohm left. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go elsewhere. I do wonder if it's like, you know what? I think with the opportunity, this guy could come in and be good.
I'm optimistic about McWilliams solely for the fact that I do not trust PJ Fleck to develop a wide receiver at all.
Corey Davis.
All the man knows how to do is run running backs into the ground.
Keith,
I'm still mad about Mo Ibrahim.
Very well. You're not rolling the boat very well this episode. Like, I'm getting tired of that. Like, people should have different sayings every season. Like, row the boat, buddy. That was so 2021.
Hey, he's got a brand and he sticks to it. I'll give him credit there. And honestly, I like the brand of football he plays. Like, I like hard-nosed, run-the-ball football.
It's Big Ten football.
Yeah, from a coaching staff and a scheme change, McWilliams, he's probably licking at the chops going from a PJ Fleck pound the rock offense to a Brohm scheme where we like to air the ball out.
He's like, throwing the ball, you say. What is this you speak of? Until Isaac Brown and Duke Watson are getting 85% of the offensive production. But nonetheless, I kid, of course. But it's been a great episode. It's been a while since we talked football. Going from talking about football for 3 years because basketball was so bad to now talking so much about basketball. It's like, oh, yeah, we've still got football to talk about. But hope you all enjoy. When we come back tomorrow, we're back to the basketball side. Georgia Tech is up next for the Louisville Cardinals down in Atlanta. We'll preview that matchup and more when we come back. Until then, we'll see you then. Everyone have a great day and go Cards.